Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. We begin today's program in Brasilia, where BRICS state leaders are gathering for the 11th summit. This year's meeting is seen to usher in a second golden decade for more cooperation among the 5 emerging markets. BRICS members are expected to reaffirm support for multilateralism and partnerships. Earlier, I talked to our panelists about that, but before we get to that debate, take a look at this backgrounder with the latest information first.
Embracing the second golden decade. After the past years, the emerging market bloc, BRICS, has grown into a major force in the global economy and a voice in international affairs. In 2018, BRICS accounted for about 24% of the world GDP and 16% of global trade.
So we are going to make some comments about strengthening and reforming multilateralism. It includes the UN, the IMF, the Security Council, the WTO. We are also going to make comments about our economic and financial cooperation in several areas.
And this year, the focus is on an innovative future. At last year's summit in South Africa, BRICS nations agreed to build a partnership for a new industrial revolution, tapping into the potential of areas such as the digital economy and smart manufacturing. BRICS leaders gather amid uncertainties with rising unilateralism and trade protectionism. These have sent jitters over currents of profound changes around the world.
We, BRIC countries, we are going to send out a strong message to the international community that we are defending strongly the multilateral system, a more open, free, fair international trade system. So I think that will be a very strong message this summit will deliver to the international community.
After the abrupt cancellation of the APEC summit in Chile, the BRICS summit has become a more essential platform for multilateralism. BRICS nations have to carry the torch of free trade. All eyes are on how far these countries will work together in pushing for their common agenda in the international arena.
For more on the BRICS Summit, we have in Las Vegas Charles Tang, president of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry. In Moscow, we are joined by Alexander Lukin, director of the East Asian and SCO Studies at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Last but not least, in Beijing, Liu Baocheng, dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. This year's BRICS Summit apparently has more significance than it used to be. Particularly now, there's a great juncture of change. Mr. Tang, how do you see that?
Because of the world multipolar and isolationist movement, I think that the BRICS summit will be very, very important to discuss all these complex worldwide issues. And the BRICS are advancing a lot because from an acronym invented by Jim O'Neill, it has become a major movement. And together, they formed the new development bank, which is helping a lot of the worldwide countries to finance their infrastructure development.
Yeah.
And the new BRICS Development Bank knows the needs of the emerging nations.
Will financial cooperation, Professor Lukin, one of the key areas this time for the BRICS Summit?
It is one of the important things which is usually discussed and will be discussed this time. But I don't think that BRICS is an economic group or organization. The main idea of the BRICS is more geopolitical, and BRICS is more about also changing the system of global governance. The bilateral cooperation between the member states is an important but not the most important thing the BRICS is discussing. So BRICS emerged from the, I would say, dissatisfaction of some major non-Western states and centers of power with their role in the kind of Western-dominated system of global governments. So BRICS, I would say, represents the voice of non-Western world, or if we use the phrase "the West and the rest," it represents the rest in global government system, and that's why its main goal is to change, without undermining it significantly, to change the entire system of global governments so that non-Western world should have more say. The financial system and the BRICS Bank should be seen from that angle, that this is kind of, well, it's not a complete alternative to existing system, to say World Bank or International Monetary Fund, but it gives some kind of more option for countries to in the financial area.
Professor Liu, now two things: whether global governance is likely to be thoroughly and effectively discussed, and whether the consensus among the BRICS economies will be able to bring more certainties to global governance. That probably is a big question mark.
That's true. Yes, the BRICS Summit was really created to challenge and review the existing global order together with governance, particularly in the financial sector. And it is there to also to fill the gap of deficiency provided by existing global financial institutions. And in the meantime, the BRICS economy also represents the emerging economies. Now they are able to cluster together with a common platform to, if not really to change, but rather to contribute to the betterment of the global financial governance and institution, and also the deficiency in supporting infrastructure development in the member states, and also the other developing economies to work towards the sustainable development goals sanctioned by the United Nations.
Of course, you know, the bigger concept are very much bigger aspirations, but what about details? Mr. Tang, for example, some of the BRICS economies have been increasingly enthusiastic about finding alternatives to the SWIFT system. Now we all know the SWIFT system has a lot to do with the dominance of the US dollar. So some of these economies already finding their alternatives. What does that mean for the BRICS finding their own ways forward despite of the turbulence?
I think that it has very much to do with what we were talking about finding alternative governance and finding alternative financial system, because since Bretton Woods, the world global financial system has been controlled by the largest debtor nations of the world, except for Germany, and creditor nations like China and the BRICS countries did not have much of a voice. You know, why does the World Bank and IMF always have to have an American and European president? Why not a Chinese president? Why not a Russian president? So the same thing goes for SWIFT. SWIFT is a system where the United States has total control over, and it can be used, and it has been in the past, for, let's say, political reasons. And to, you know, when you have isolate countries' financial system, you can use that. So I think that it would be very important for the BRICS countries to have their own system if they can do it.
The dominance of the US dollar, of course, is a big subject. Whether Libra will be adopted, when you hear the House hearing, very much is about the dominance of the US dollar, whether that will be undermined or not. But Professor Liu, we're not talking about US dollar, we're talking about whether the alternatives the BRICS economies find in terms of, for example, the SWIFT system would set a precedence about how these economies are likely to solve some of the problems as a result of a Western, what they consider dominated international governance system. How much that will change, the question really is.
I think one is that it brings up a showcase to focus on infrastructure development and clean energy and transportation, etc.
Yeah, but you know, my question really is, when you adopt an alternative to the SWIFT system, it is certainly bringing some kinds of hope that there will be more equal opportunities among economies. But the question really is, how sustainable will that be? How welcome that will be? And also whether it will be a practice that eventually lead to certain results, or it's just experiment at a very small scale.
Well, it has really reduced reliance on the dominance of the US dollar because the member states' currency can be there to denominate the value, and also over the recent years they also trying to raise local currency as deposit to support the infrastructure development
And currency swap as well?
Yes, and also currency swap. So it's a very useful trial, and particularly for the member states, you see that since the establishment, the share of global GDP has been increased among these members from 30% to 36%, which shows quite a remarkable success. And the fact that the bank, the new development bank, has really, over the past 5 years, has really contributed to more than 40 major projects in member states and also in neighboring states, which are really operated very successfully in a transparent manner.
I see.
So this is really an alternative to a showcase to some of the deficiencies the old established global institutions will have to benchmark on.
Well, the BRICS banks and also the alternative, obviously the BRICS economies are trying to look forward to the SWIFT system, be the starting point of real results that you see BRICS are going to make a difference. Professor Lukin.
BRICS can make a difference. The institutions such as new bank, BRICS Bank, cannot completely, cannot be an absolute alternative to existing system, but it, as I said, it can give an option. So for countries which in a crisis or in a difficult situation can apply either to Western-dominated system banks or to BRICS Bank. And it will bring more competition in this field, and of course it's quite good for world economy. But also I would like to mention that we are talking only on BRICS about BRICS Bank, but the bank is only a small part of what BRICS is doing as an organization. It has cooperation and proposals in many spheres, beginning from, say, anti-terrorist activities, they're discussing this, and to sports and education, for example. So I would say that BRICS is trying to present a non-Western alternative in many spheres, not only financial system. And this is very important because BRICS has become kind of, for example, within G20, BRICS is a group which represents non-Western interests. And this is very important because before that we had only G7 there, but now we have G7 on one pole and BRICS on the other pole.
I see.
You know, there was a time when Russia actually was part of both G8 and BRICS, but our Western friends did their best to push Russia out of the Western part of the world. So now Russia is definitely also a part of the rest, a part of the non-Western
That's
world.
why there are a lot of media reports suggesting, Professor Liu, that BRICS actually is more about geopolitics rather than just economic entity. What do you say?
Well, I would rather wish that the BRICS is more focused, because nowadays everyone is talking about big, broad questions, G20, APEC, even the WEF, the World Economic Forum. So, how can these, global institutions differentiate themselves by concentrating on something that they can really specialize and they can really create developmental impact. So that's something very important. For example, the Shanghai Cooperation focused more on initially on anti-terrorism, on geopolitics, but then expanded to economics and to finance, etc. And now, the BRICS Summit is there. I think it should be focused on how emerging economies can really find an alternative of governance, an alternative way of financing themselves, and be more practical.
I see. Mr. Tan, where do you stand in that debate?
Well, I think it's a very important geopolitical grouping, and especially, Chairman Xi Jinping's initiative to create a BRICS Plus will enlarge the grouping. And if you take BRICS Plus to BRICS Plus, it's a much larger, and in terms of GDP, in terms of population, geographical area, than the rich nations clubs. And, it's very important because the BRICS and the BRICS Plus understand the needs of the developing nations, which were not clearly and very attended to by the developed nations dominated world financial system and geopolitical dominance.
What about the synergy?
So I think it's a very important geopolitical grouping.
What about, when we talk about grouping, what about the synergy and also interactions among the economies in the BRICS? I mean, earlier, Mr. Tan, you know that Brazilian president visited China, and this is, of course, his important visit prior to Brazil hosting the BRICS Summit this time. So how do you see the synergy among the BRICS economies?
Well, President Bolsonaro's visit to China was very, very important. Once he became president, he realized the importance and the strategic alliance between the two giants of South America and of Asia. And his visit, he certainly liked his visit because, when he was in China, he announced that the Chinese do no longer need visa to go to Brazil. So that is a sign that he has been very pleased with what he saw. And before that, his son had been in China a few weeks before his visit, and certainly also had reported very favorably to his father.
I see.
And so I think that with this visit, the strategic alliance between the two giants will continue to grow.
What about the synergy from your perspective, Professor Lukin? Now, Russia has been quite active on the international stage recently, particularly with the latest development in the Middle East. So how is Russia look at the synergy among the BRICS countries and looking at its potential?
Well, BRICS is very important for Russia. I would say that BRICS actually grew out of Russian-Chinese cooperation. I remember in the 1990s, Mr. Primakov, who at that time was Russian Prime Minister, I think it was 96, when he said that there will be a close cooperation in the future between Russia, China, and India. Then other countries joined, Brazil and then South Africa, and but the core of it was still Russian-Chinese cooperation, I would say. And still Russia and China are the closest partners among all BRICS countries. The trade is growing and they're strategic partners, and they cooperate almost in every sphere, international sphere. About Brazil, it is, I agree that it's very important, because when President Bolsonaro was elected, people thought that Brazil was kind of anti-BRICS and might even leave the group. But it all changed because it turned out, as my colleagues rightly said, that that cooperation with China, China's investment is very important to Brazil. And but this is not the only thing, because Brazil is not on, because BRICS is not only about bilateral cooperation, but also there are, I would say, there are international problems and issues which big non-Western countries share. And basically what they want to do is to see the world more multipolar and less Western dominated. And this interest is still there regardless to who is in power.
Professor Liu, about that, now China has been encouraging and advocating among the BRICS countries about multilateralism, hope that it could be a platform to uphold multilateralism. But the question really is, how will developing an emerging economies be able to do that, and will others follow suit? That is the issue, Professor.
Yes. Well, these BRICS members, they have a common goal. Immediately is industrialization process, the development of infrastructure, clean energy, etc. But in the meantime, they also are really having still reliance on export market and technology input from with the developed world. And within themselves, actually, there is also competition and cooperation because they have similar industrial structure. And when China is really moving forward in industrial upgradation, hopefully there's going to be more synergy, but they are also competing on the same market and with partners. And also it's a really complex situation. They all want to reduce the reliance on the dominance of US dollar and the governance of the old-fashioned Bretton Woods.
I see. For now, we want to thank the three of you gentlemen for joining us about the latest with the BRICS and what to expect. Charles Tang, Alexander Lukin, Liu Baocheng. Thank you so much.